Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Today I wanted to share with you some of my favorite fantasy books that I have ever read. The list is a total of 10 books, 5 of which are standalone and the other 5 are series, and they will be in order from my least to most favorite. We're starting first with the standalone books. At number 5 we have Prince of Song and Sea by Lindsay Miller. Now this is technically cheating because this book is part of a series, technically speaking, but they're all autoconclusive. It's part of the Disney Princess series, which tells the story of famous popular Disney tales, but from the perspective of the princess instead of the princesses, and they all have their own twist and spin to it. This is the first one, and it's a Little Mermaid retelling from Prince Eric's perspective. Now, I was very excited when this book was first announced because Lindsay Miller is an author that I have been reading for a few years now, and I've really liked everything I've read by her. So when this book came out, I immediately bought it and was really excited to read it. I brought it along with me for a trip, and I read it, I think, in a day. I started this when I boarded the bus from New York to Maryland, and then I finished it while I waited to board my flight to Atlanta. And even though it's still the Little Mermaid story, it has its own twist to it that just makes it different enough to keep you reading the entire time, even though you technically know how it's going to end and what's going to happen next. I really liked it. I love Lindsay Miller's writing in general. And something that I really like about her books and the stories that she tells is the way she includes queer representation in all of her books in a very seamless way. I love this book. I think it did a great job of exploring Prince Eric's personality and his background story as well, and it also adds queer rep, which is something that I always really appreciate about Lindsay Miller's books. Now the next book, I don't have it physically with me because I read it through Kindle. This is a fantasy book where books can turn into monsters. They're sentient, and also magic users are literally bound to demons to be able to use their magic, which I thought was pretty cool. I was really sold on this idea so fast the moment I read the synopsis, and I enjoyed this book so much. I knew going into it that it had a few mixed reviews, but I loved it. It just checked all my boxes in terms of introducing literature books into a fantasy world and make it so fun, cool, and interesting. The main setting of the book most of the time are libraries, and we're always surrounded by books, and the magic system in it was really cool to me. Also, the main character, Elizabeth, I feel like she has a lot of agency. She really does not let herself be manipulated or used by the men in her life, and I just love the chemistry and dynamic that she has with the love interest and other important characters to the story. And also the romance is a beautiful slow burn. I enjoyed it to no end, and I just love exploring the darker side of the magic and how it affects the users and also the families in general, because usually there's like a demon associated or linked with one family and it's passed through generations, and I just think that's explored really well, and I just love the concept in general. Yeah, I really loved every second of this book, and the ending lives in my mind rent-free. And also last year a novella came out, which I do have it. It's Mysteries of Thorn Manor, and it's really short. I read it so quickly and it was just a really added bonus to it. Now that I think about it, does this also count as cheating, technically? Because it's not just one book, it also has a novella. Then at number 3 we have From Dust Aflame by Rebecca Podos. Now, before going into this book, I was a little hesitant, a little worried that I might be a little bit lost because it is inspired by Jewish legends, and I'm not that familiar with Jewish histories, cultures, and legends, so I was a little scared that I might be a little bit lost with it, but that was not the case. Everything is so well explored in this book, and I understood everything perfectly, very quickly, and I just really liked the book in the end, despite my initial hesitation. It's the story of Hannah, a girl who has spent her entire life basically moving from place to place with her mom and brother, Gabe. And then on the morning of her 17th birthday, she wakes up and finds herself changed. There's something different about her that's not normal. and then every day she wakes up with a different mutation. So her mom says that she thinks she knows what's going on and she can find a way to fix it. So she leaves trying to find that solution, and then she doesn't come back. So Hannah and Gabe are really worried, and they receive a letter. So they decide to follow that up, and they end up going to the place where their mother grew up, and they meet their mom's family, who they had no idea they existed. They knew nothing about them because their mom had never told them anything. It was an amazing story. There's also great romance in it as well, but again, to me, the most important thing about this and what stood out to me the most was the family's history and just the family dynamics between her and her brother, and also their mom's family once they get to meet them. I thought it was a really cool story. But yeah, this was an amazing story, and I really wish I could say more, but I don't really know what to say that won't spoil what happens in the book, because it really is an amazing experience reading this book. And if it sounds interesting to you, you should definitely pick it up, because I did not regret buying and reading this book. Then at number 2 we have In the Ravenous Dark by A.M. Strickland. If you have watched my favorite 2023 reads video, you might remember that I mentioned another book by this author, which was Court of the Undying Seasons. And I read this book first, and I really enjoyed it. At this point, I'm not sure which of the two is my favorite, because I really liked both of them. This has such great twists. It was an amazing read. It's a story of Rovan, and I really hope I'm pronouncing her name right, whose father gave up his life trying to protect her and keep her magic hidden. And since then, she has been hiding it, but accidentally she reveals it, and she is brought to the palace, where she is bound magically to a spirit that can control her and her magic. And this spirit is called, I also hope I'm gonna pronounce that right, Avrilos. That's how I always pronounce it in my mind, at least. Throughout her time at the palace, she also meets, again, Lydia, that's how I've always pronounced it, who is a rebellious princess, and Rovan finds herself falling in love with both Lydia and Avrilos, which is extremely messy and complicated, especially once they unearth a dark secret that could mean the destruction of the entire world that they know, for both the living and the dead. And they have to find a way to stop it. Again, this book has such amazing twists and dark twists as well, and just I didn't see the ending of this coming. And I particularly like that despite hating love triangles with a burning passion, I really like the way it was handled in this and the resolution. In my opinion, it's the only right way to resolve a love triangle. So yeah, In the Ravenous Dark, an amazing read. I adored it. It's probably gonna be on my list of favorites for a long time. And then at number 1, as the last book of our standalone portion of this video, is Belle Revolt by Lindsay Miller. Again, another Lindsay Miller book in this top 5. I know, probably a lot, but I really enjoy her writing, and this was the first book I read by her, and I think I read it in like a day or so. I saw this book on Twitter, and the cover really intrigued me, and then the plot and name as well, so I think immediately grabbed it the moment it came out. It's the story of Emily and Annette, and they're two girls from entirely different backgrounds, and when they accidentally meet each other, they realize that they look really similar to one another, so they decide to switch places. In this world, there are two types of magic called the noonday arts and the midnight arts, and the noonday arts are the more severe, harsh type of magic, and it's usually reserved for men, while the midnight arts are reserved for women because they're softer and kinder. So Annette comes from a lower class, relatively poor family, and she's always wanted to practice the midnight arts because she thinks she has a good affinity for them. While Emily comes from a rich elite family, and she's always wanted to practice the noonday arts, but her mother is not having it, and she wants her to study the midnight arts at this prestigious academy. So when they realize that they look so similar, they decide to switch places, and Annette goes to this school that Emily is supposed to go to, and she can practice the midnight arts under the person that is believed to be one of the most extraordinary users of midnight arts, while Emily can go to university to practice the noonday arts in any way she will be allowed to. I just really, really like this book and this concept, and there's also a war brewing between the monarchy and nobility and a rebellious group that is fighting for better rights for the lower classes who are being used by the nobility for their own gain and power. I just really, really like the way this is constructed and the little secrets and twists and turns that we get to see as we move along in the plot. And yeah, in general, I really, really enjoyed this book, and it stuck with me for so many years. I don't even remember when this book came out, but I read it as soon as it came out. Since then, it's been one of my favorites. I keep thinking about it all the time because I really, really like the magic system within it and the writing, and again, the way that Lindsay Miller includes queer characters in such a seamless way, which I think is great. So yeah, this is probably my favorite fantasy book that I have ever read. Okay, so we're moving on to the series now, and first of all, I want to say that I had 2 criteria for choosing these series, and that criteria is, number 1, they have to be series that are already finished being published, and number 2, I have to have finished reading them as well. And considering that, I have 2 book series that are not finished and that I really, really like, so I want to talk about them anyway. So these are my 2 honorable mentions. First of all, we have The Marvelers. I believe this is called the Conjurer-verse, and I already talked about this series a little bit more at length in my favorite reads of 2023 video. So I'm not gonna go into too much detail, but yeah, I love this book, I love this series, and I cannot wait for the next installment. And then the second and last honorable mention is The Third Daughter by Adrienne Tooley. This is part of a duology. The second book is coming out at some point this year. I read this book, I think, in August, September of last year, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. It's the 3rd book, I think, that I read by this author. I just think it was probably one of her best. I think my favorite by her is still Sophie and the Bone Zone, but this was also so incredibly good. So in this world, everyone is waiting the prophesied return of the new maiden, who is meant to be reborn as a 3rd daughter of a 3rd daughter. Now, Elodie, one of our main characters, is the 1st daughter of the queen, and her younger sister, Brienne, is the prophesied 3rd daughter. When the queen unexpectedly dies, Brienne is still very young, very naive, doesn't know much about her world, and is very influenceable, especially by her father. Elodie comes up with a plan to take her sister out of commission temporarily so that she can be the one to rule until her sister is ready, because she does not want Brienne's father to have the power and control over their country, because she doesn't like him at all. They don't like each other in general, Elodie and Brienne's father, and it kind of backfires on her. So she allies herself with Sabine, an apothecary, to try and bring her sister back so that they can regain control of the queendom before it's too late. Again, this book was so good. I enjoyed it so much, and I really cannot wait for the 2nd book in the series so that I can see the way it's wrapped up, because the ending of this book literally has me on the edge of my seat waiting. Really, really loved it. Really recommend it as well. Okay, so with the honorable mentions out of the way, we can jump right into my top 5 favorite fantasy series. Now, on number 5, we have the All of Us Villains duology by Christine Lynn Herman and Amanda Foody. Now, this book is The Hunger Games, but make it magical and a little queer, and it has a pretty weird but kind of cool magic system as well. So in this universe, there's 2 kinds of magic. There's high magic, which is really powerful, and then there's also low magic that most people can use, but it is not as strong. The thing with high magic is that there's a curse upon the 7 families that control it, and every few years they're meant to choose a champion and go into this competition, and whoever survives, their family has control of the high magic for the next cycle. One of my favorite things about this is that we follow multiple characters at once that each have their POV. Out of the 7 people that are competing, we have access to 4 POVs, and it's really cool and interesting because they're all fighting against each other and they each have their own objectives, and it's not just the fact that one of us is to win the competition. They also have different motivations apart from that. And I just thought that was really cool and really well set up. And the stakes are pretty high in this as well. And I really enjoyed it. The first one was good. But the second book, that ending, that resolution is what made me really like this series as a whole and have it as one of my favorites. I was not expecting it to go the way it did. I was not expecting the authors to go that route. But yeah, I really liked it. And also, even though it's not the main part of this series, as it's mostly about the fantasy and about the characters individually, there's romance in this book, and I feel like it was so well done. All the romantic storylines are mostly slow burns, and each of them has a different trope that I really, really like. So it was such a delight to read them, even though it was not the main point of the book series. Then at number 4, we have the Malice duology by Heather Walter. This series is supposed to be a Sleeping Beauty retelling, but I don't really consider the first book a retelling. It's mostly a prequel or villain origin story, if you will. I think it's such a good series. It does a great job of portraying Alice's backstory, and it builds up in such a nice way until the climax of the book, which all of that leading up to the climax felt rushed but in a good way, and chaotic, but it was really, really good. I loved it. That ending had me so on edge waiting for the second book in the series. And while I didn't like the second book half as much as I did the first one, it was still really good and really entertaining, and the resolution was probably the only way the series could have ended that made sense. And especially considering everything that happens in the second book, any other ending would have been a tad unsatisfactory. And yeah, it was a bittersweet ending to the series, but it was still really good and well-rounded for everything that happens within the book. Then at number 3, we have These Feather Flames by Alexandra Overy. This is her debut novel, and honestly, I think it's pretty impressive, the plot and the world that she builds, considering it's her first book. It's the story of twins Isabetta and Asia, and since they were pretty young, they were separated because Isabetta was chosen to be the next ruler, while Asia was meant to become the firebird, or the keeper of the balance between nature and magic. But then suddenly their mother dies under mysterious circumstances, and Asia and her aunt have to return to the palace for the funeral, the coronation, but also to find out what's going on in the palace and what really happened to the queen. I think it was such a good exploration of sibling history and dynamics, and just the awkwardness of being separated for so long and having that connection being brought back and being unsure of how to act around each other, but still feeling that connection and that love between them. And these characters by themselves are still so good, and just seeing them interact with each other, with other characters, it was really well written. And I love the ending of this book and the series, and just I was really, really impressed positively by everything in this series, and I really, really liked it. That's why I made it to my list of favorite fantasy books. I really recommend it. They are pretty quick to read, and they're just so immersing. I found myself lost in these books the entire time I was reading them. Then at number 2, we have the Secret Shanghai series by Chloe Gong. Now, I'm including both duologies in this only because it would feel incomplete if I didn't, even though my favorite of the two is definitely the first one, This Vial and the Lights. I do think that the ending of this duology is not really the end of it, because it's not fully wrapped up until the ending of Foul Heart Huntsman. So yeah, it would feel weird if I didn't include all of it, especially because I did love all of the books. It's just that these ones are my favorite. I first heard of this series when it first came out in 2020, I believe. I learned about it through Twitter, and it was a few months before it came out. And of course, being an English graduate, anything revolving Shakespeare is gonna call to me in some way or another, whether it's retelling, whether it's just a lot of Shakespeare references. And this book was so good, lived up to all my expectations and more. And yeah, I just really, really loved it. It's always gonna have a big piece of my heart. Really, really enjoy being in this universe with these characters for so long, and I am so sad that it's over. And then last at number 1, because it couldn't be any other way, we have the Shades of Magic series by V. Schwab. Now, this could technically also be cheating, because I said that there's 2 criteria for these books, and that's that I finished reading them and that they're all published. And technically, the author has just released the first book in a new series within this world, the Threads of Power series. But these 3 books counted as one series, and then this is a separate series within the same world. So it continues the story, but it's separate. So I don't think it's cheating. Anyway, these books, I read them for the first time in 2020, thick of the pandemic, and they were my comfort characters and story throughout all of it. I just loved diving into this at the end of a long day of online classes. They were really good books, very immersive, and I just love the idea of having different universe being interconnected by one city and just a chosen few being able to travel between them. I love the magic system within this. I just found it to be a really, really good series, and I loved it with my entire heart. Again, always gonna have a big piece of my heart because of it, and I am extremely terrified, but also dying to dive into the fragile threads of power soon, when I'm mentally and emotionally and physically ready to put myself through that. So those were all of the books that I wanted to share with you today. It was pretty hard to choose only 10 books for these lists because fantasy has always been one of my favorite genres to read and dive into, even though I haven't been reading it as much lately. But it's always been really important to me. It's always been my go-to genre when I need a pick-me-up. So it's always been and it's always going to be important to me. But now I would like to know, which are your favorite fantasy books? Because I'm on the hunt for my next favorite fantasy read. So if you have any recommendations, please leave them in the comments so that I can get to them at some point in the near future. I would really appreciate it. And with that said, thank you so much for watching as always, and see you next time. Bye!